Okay, so I want to talk about a concept that is important, and you need to understand this in order to understand a lot of what's going to take place in this course, and that is flow versus batch processes. And we're going to deal with a lot of flow in this course. We may occasionally have a batch process, but again, we need to understand what these mean. So let me just start out with an example. Let's just say it's my birthday, and I decide, well, you know what, I've been a good boy this year, so I'm going to make myself a cake. So I go ahead and get myself a nice little bowl here, see my little bowl, and I throw in some ingredients into my bowl, add them in, and then I say, okay, I need to keep mixing this cake. So the next thing I do, I take my bowl and with my stuff and I mix it. Got to mix up my ingredients, my eggs and flour and all that sort of stuff. And then I'm going to take my bowl and I'm going to pour all my stuff into a pan. And then I'm going to go ahead and put this pan into an oven. See if I can put that in the oven there. Got all this fire coming out. Still happy. Hopefully it doesn't burn. And then I take out the oven, take it out. After it's done, got myself a little cake when I'm done, put a little frosting on it, etc. And I'm done. And that's the whole process of making a cake. And this whole process, which I just showed you, is more or less fine. If it's my birthday, I want to go ahead and create and bake a cake, great. Just did it great. Probably took me like 15-20 minutes to do it. Problem is, what if I need to bake 100 cakes? So rather than, let's just say I decide to bake a cake for everybody in class. So I need to bake, 60, 70, 100 cakes for everybody in class. Well, this process was going to take me forever. So much better is if I just call up all my friends and I say, all right, let's do this, this way. I'm going to be the guy who mixes, or I'm going to be the person that adds, and I'm going to hand you the bowl, and you are going to go ahead and be a mixer, and then that person's going to take their bowl and they're going to hand it to somebody who puts it into the oven, etc. So we just create ourselves a little assembly line of cake making. And this is much more efficient than if I try to make every single cake myself. If I do all the adding, all the mixing, all the pouring, all the baking, etc. It's much better if I have like 5 or 6 people and they each focus on their one task. And this is the concept of flow versus batch. The first example I gave you is essentially a batch example where you do everything in place. You mix it, you bake it, you're in place. You just stay in your kitchen and do everything. One person does everything. No movement or movement of the cake, essentially. This other example right here, this is flow, because the cake is essentially moving from one person to another person, to another person, to an oven, to the next person, etc. And that's flow. And that's the whole idea that you need to get in your head, is flow occurs when we have chemicals moving, when they're constantly moving. And like as I said, most of the processes we're going to deal with in this class deal with flow. So let's just look at a chemical example. Let's just say I have 2 little flasks that I want to do a reaction in various chemical steps. And I take a little beaker of A and dump it in. Little beaker of B, dump it in. And then I take those 2 flasks and put them in front of flames. To heat them up. So we're now heating those flasks, stuff you've done in chemistry course before. Then I go ahead and take those 2 flasks, dump them into some sort of other reaction flask. And then I go ahead and take this and I do a distillation over a flame again. And this whole process is essentially what you've done in chemistry lab. If you've ever done a chemistry lab like this, you have done a batch process. You've basically taken your beakers, heated them, mixed them, done whatever to get get your products or whatever you're getting for that experiment, and that's the batch process. Flow-wise, a chemical process would be much more efficient if we did something like this. If we had tanks of A and B, and we had something like a pipe that connected to them and a pump. And it sent those into heat exchangers, and a heat exchanger is just a fancy name for something that heats something up or cools it off. And we'll talk about this probably later on in the course, but as we get into more details. And then we send those chemicals through some more pipes into a reactor. And then finally we send it to more equipment like a distillation column. And we'll talk more about distillation columns and so forth later in the term. What are all these different things is not so important, but the key process is that the chemical that we're trying to react and make into something else is continually flowing. We have tanks of A and B, and this is flowing through pipes, usually metal pipes, and it's being pumped to a heat exchanger, which increases the temperature, and then it's piped into this reactor where it reacts, and then it's sent to a distillation column which separates materials and goes up and down and so forth. And this is a much, much more efficient way to process chemicals. When you're trying to process 10,000 pounds of fertilizer in your chemical plant 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, this is the way we do it. We essentially have chemicals flowing through pipes and going through different processes, whether they're reactors or whether we're heating them up or whether we're separating them. And this right here is the core of what a flow process is, and also the core of what most chemical engineering processes are. Whether you're making drugs, whether you're making gasoline, whether you're making food, we're taking some raw products and putting them through some sort of flow process to make them some refined products that have value and worth. And that's it. And if you can understand the difference again between the flow and the batch, that flow involves chemicals that are flowing or moving, then you've understand the great majority of what chemical engineers do and what is involved in chemical engineering. And there you have it.